Welcome to the American Warrior Show, the podcast of the American Warrior Society, brought to you by our host, Mike Seeklander. Mike is an accomplished professional shooter, former police officer, former Marine, and the co-host of the Outdoor Channel's leading self-defense show, The Best Defense.
And welcome to the American Warrior Show. This is podcast number 1, and I am Mike Seeklander, your host. Nice to meet you, and this is the first show of this show. Number 1, the American Warrior Society is a supporting sponsor of this show. Obviously, the American Warrior is part of the American Warrior Society, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this particular podcast, which includes the format of the show, some of my goals. I'd like to introduce myself and talk to you a little bit about who I am, and hopefully why you'll listen to some of the things I give you on the show. We'll get into some details later on. So, number 1, this show is going to be a repeating show. My goal is to do it every other week, so I'd love to have you join me every other week. We will release this show on the average on Monday every other week. We're looking at about 30 minutes in length, and here's the reason behind that, folks. This is going to be a tool that hopefully you add to your toolbox as a mode to learn. And I know that for most of us, we have different methods that we like to learn or that actually fit us best. For example, I'm a visual learner. I like to be able to see things and picture it in my mind. That's how I learn. And you might be a visual learner. You might be someone that really enjoys listening to a podcast. You might be someone that enjoys reading a blog or an article. But the key concept here is, I know for a fact based on science that about 80% of what I say is going to go in one ear and out the other. So the goal is to sectionize this show, break it up into small parts, keep it no longer than 30 minutes in length, and make sure that if you're listening to this while you're driving to or from work or wherever, that you get something out of it. And that's the key thing, you. It's all about you, the listener. Once again, thank you for joining me. Generally speaking, the structure of the show is going to be very simple. We're going to talk to you about a case study of some sort. For an example, if there were a situation that occurred in the U.S. or worldwide, and that particular subject matter has an interesting set of properties, meaning we can take that particular incident and do a case study, and I can teach you something from it, I'm going to bring that up. Oftentimes on the show, we're probably going to talk to you about some gear we've tested, seen, or would like to test and get some discussion there. I hope sometime in the future that I get some call-ins from you all because, once again, it's not just about me, it's about you. Every show, I want to give you a tip. I want to give you something you can utilize and, of course, an action plan. So I'm going to have something on the show itself, which will also be included in the show notes, that you can action. And remember, action versus intent, they're completely different angles of approach there. Everyone that I know, and probably you listening right now, has an intent to do something. It's meaningless, though, unless we action that intent. I mean, how many of you have a New Year's resolution or have had a New Year's resolution that you never followed through with? Exactly. You had a great intent, but until you action things, that means nothing. So, every one of these shows will include an action plan or some steps that you can hopefully follow to utilize the information I've given. So before I get into the structure and talk about myself, today's show is brought to you by Armscore USA, one of the greatest providers and manufacturers of ammunition in the U.S. and world. A side note, I am a sponsored athlete with Armscore USA, and I've been shooting their ammo for about 2 years now. And can tell you without a doubt, I compete with it in every single match I shoot, and I've shot probably, give or take, 50 to 60,000 rounds of their factory ammunition. And grand total through that course of practice, training, matches, etc., 50,000 rounds of ammunition. I've had 1 to 2 pieces of ammunition that was faulty, that had an issue with a primer or whatever else. So to me, that's phenomenal. I've not shot factory ammunition that was that reliable in a long time. So thank you to them. Show sponsor number 2, Corey Lack Pictures. I use Corey Lack in all of my current books, DVDs, etc. And I actually stumbled across Corey through a good friend of mine, and he is located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Incredibly talented is not the word I would use. He's literally a savant when it comes to doing video and pictures. And if you need something done in the gun industry, or any industry, whichever one you happen to be working in, he's your man. Look him up, CoreyLackPictures.com. Corey is spelled with an EY. So thank you to those show sponsors, and let's get into the show here. So first of all, a little bit about Mike Seeklander. Who am I and why should you listen to me? Where do I come from? How did I get here? Currently, I'm the owner of Shooting Performance, LLC. That's shooting-performance.com. And Shooting Performance is a full-spectrum training company. I conceptualized and opened Shooting Performance as a publishing platform initially about 6 years ago when I wrote my first book. And the book that started this whole thing was Your Competition Handgun Training Program, which was actually a product that evolved from my original coaching program. For those that don't know me yet, you will hear in a second. I've got a pretty extensive competitive shooting background and have been training and shooting, competing at what I would call the top levels for, almost 20 years now. So Shooting Performance, my company, you can find me online. It's the company that I publish my books and DVDs through, as well as train. And about 70% of my time, income, and devotion is to training individuals, hopefully like you. I travel throughout the U.S. and world and put on a series of competitive and defensive classes. I cover material with the shotgun, handgun, rifle systems, and specifically apply some of the performance principles that I found took me to the next level in my own training in those classes. So for example, if you're a defensive shooter, a guy that carries concealed or a gal that carries concealed, and you have an interest in improving your defensive skill sets, I have a class for you. And that class is a combination of the material that I found helped take me to the top in the competitive shooting world within the defensive context. What that means to you is I'm going to teach you some of the shooting skills that I stole and got from all of these professional shooters that I've worked with over the years. We're going to tie that in with the tactics and the context that you're going to need to be able to survive a gunfight if you're unlucky enough to get into one. So previous to full-time operations at Shooting Performance, LLC, I was the Chief Operating Officer, the Director of Training, and the Senior Instructor at the U.S. Shooting Academy in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I actually moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma for the U.S. Shooting Academy and helped build that business. And I ran the business for several years until it changed hands. And I had the opportunity to move on and establish my own company full time. I was recruited to the U.S. Shooting Academy from the federal government. When I got the phone call from the original owner named Tom Fee, I was working in Charleston, South Carolina with an agency called the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, FLETC. And for those of you who don't know, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center is the center that trains pretty much every federal agency, excluding the FBI, DEA, Border Patrol, and maybe a couple others. But basically, if there's a federal agency out there that has law enforcement officers, FLETC trains those officers typically in a basic academy, and they have a variety of advanced programs. Before FLETC, I had the incredibly unique opportunity, one that actually shaped my thought process and my career as the lead instructor and an active Federal Air Marshal with the Federal Air Marshal Service. And obviously the listeners out there, you listeners, remember Doomsday 9/11 when terrorists flew airplanes into buildings and the Pentagon and killed a bunch of brave U.S. citizens. At that time, I was a police officer. I'll get into that here in a sec. And at the same time was competing at a very high level and doing a bunch of shooting, and had the opportunity through a guy named Jerry Barnhart, believe it or not, the Burner, one of the original national champion shooters way back when, to talk to the guys at the Federal Air Marshal Service who were hiring. And in December of 2001, I got hired by the Federal Air Marshal Service as one of their civilian instructors. I was one of the plank civilian instructors that started there right after 9/11, and our job was to train the entire cadre of air marshals that were literally being hired at a cyclic rate. I mean, it was probably the biggest stand-up of a federal agency in the history of the U.S., I'm guessing. And my job was to train them. I taught in tactics. I instructed in the physical training branch, but primarily with firearms. I mean, granted, when I got up there, I got hired as a firearms instructor. And because of my skills with a handgun, it was pretty natural for me to progress into that arena. And shortly thereafter, I was selected kind of unofficially as the lead firearms instructor for that particular training entity. It was a very unique time because at that point in time, the agency had very little curriculum developed. They had their old program, but myself and a bunch of the other civilian instructors were tasked with developing and writing all of the curriculum, refining it, and then making sure it was consistent for all of the air marshals we had to train. So it was a very unique time. And one of the things that I give to my students in my classes is when I'm doing my introduction, it's, I've been competing at a high level. I can shoot a handgun pretty well, on and on and on. But one thing that I want my students and you listeners to understand about Mike Seeklander is that my perspective is an objective, performance-driven perspective. What I mean by that is one of the things that shaped me as an instructor was my exposure to other, and I'm talking dozens of others, great instructors. So when I was at the Federal Air Marshal Service as that lead instructor, there was a point in time when Congress said, hey, FAM service, you need to put so many air marshals on airplanes by this date. And we responded with, hey, sorry, Congress, we can't do that at our current rate. And they responded with, well, we're not asking you to, we're telling you to. And when you get basically the order from the president down to do something, it's not a matter of saying no, you make it happen. So we stood up our training program. We doubled the throughput. We shortened the length of it to an extent. We redesigned it so we could graduate about 3 times as many FAMs as we were graduating before. And by doing that, I ran out of instructors. I didn't have enough instructors to staff the program. So I was allowed to recruit adjunct instructors from all over the U.S., and they came from different field agencies. And these guys and gals were the elite of the elite. I mean, a lot of them were retired from special operations. Some of them were former SWAT cops. Some of them were from different federal agencies. They all were instructing, at different levels. These people were the been there, done that kind of people. Luckily, little Mike Seeklander was in charge of this program. So when I brought them in to work for me to support my full-time staff, I would sit them down and talk to them in a room about what we taught and how we taught, get them trained up to an extent. And then they would go out and support the program, and they would run these little training blocks. It typically stayed for between a week and 3 weeks. And at the end of the 3-week rotation, I would bring those same instructors back into the office or go out and talk to them on the range. And I had a key question for them. And my key question was this: how do we make our program better? Remember, these are the been there, done that kind of people. They always had an answer. They would answer with, hey, it's a great program, but you can tweak this, this, or this. Or this technique is probably not the best technique in the context of where we're teaching it, which is the airplane environment. And at that point in time, a really unique thing happened. Here's what it is. I had the ability to change our curriculum with the stroke of a pen or strike on a keyboard. And I did. What we would do is we would take the feedback from those instructors. I would take it to my full-time instructors. We'd evaluate it. We'd test it if we needed to. And if there was something better that we could add to our program or something we could change, I did it. So the program evolved at a cyclic rate, probably much faster than most programs evolve in any government entity or probably civilian entity for that matter because of the time frame we're in. Remember, 9/11 had just occurred. All people cared about was the fact that we could put air marshals on airplanes to keep people safe. To do that, if they were in a gunfight at 33,000 feet, they had to win it. So I had the incredible power and ability to change a program pretty much as I needed to make it better. And that's where I got a lot of the information that I currently teach. I like to tell my students that that's one thing I want you to know about Mike Seeklander is if I tell you to do it, here is a way to do it. It may not be the way, but it's a way that I've looked at objectively from a performance-based view. What I mean by if it doesn't allow them to perform on demand, that applies to the competitive shooter or the defensive shooter, then it doesn't apply in our arena. So I wanted them to look at their techniques that way and think, okay, my instructor today on the range, Mike Seeklander, looks at things like this. So I know that I'm getting the value of the right techniques. The second thing I always tell them is when I teach you something, I'm going to make sure that I give you the why behind that something. If you ever go to a class, whether it's my class or any instructor's class out there, and they give you a technique to try or perform, if they can't tell you the why behind the technique, you might ask for your money back, because the bottom line is there's got to be a why. Well, what's in it for you as a student? In my class, when I give you the why, well, the why gives you the buy-in. Once you understand the why I'm teaching you something or why I'm telling you to do something, then the what is easy, because once I have buy-in, I know that I'm selling you versus telling you, and you'll practice that technique. So that's really important to me. Back to my bio. Now that you understand a little bit more about one of my primary values is that objective performance-driven mentality. Before the FAMS, I actually lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I worked for the Knoxville Police Department as well as the Knox County Sheriff's Department. And I got almost 8 years of local law enforcement experience. I actually got hired in the Sheriff's Department first, worked in the jails and corrections. What a unique experience that was. And I was actually part of what we called a facility security team. The short story version there was basically I hung out in a hallway that gave me access to what we call pods in the correction facility, and had a radio, and I sat there with another security member. And when things went bad, we would typically hear another correction officer screaming on his radio microphone that he's got a fight or an incident or something going on in pod C. And the hallways we worked in were about 200 yards long, give or take. I don't remember what their actual length was. And from the second we got the radio call, it was sprint to the pod and then get to work. And typically it was 3 or 4 or 5 inmates fighting, or a stabbing or something going on. So it was a pretty intense atmosphere. I was also part of what we call the SORT team, which is the Special Operations Response Team, the men in black with black balaclavas. And our mission was a special mission where basically we had a jail riot or an incident that couldn't be handled by the typical facility security shift. We would be activated and respond, and it was a great experience, great time of my life. After the Sheriff's Department, I moved on to the Police Department. I got hired by the Knoxville Police Department as a patrol officer, probably the greatest job of my life. Chased the radio for several years, about 2.5 years, until I had the opportunity to move into the organized crime section, where I worked narcotics for about 9 months, give or take, and then went back out to patrol. And of course, the rest of the story. After 9/11, I got hired by the FAM service and moved up there. A little bit more about me. I love to shoot. Specifically fell in love with competitive shooting when I was in the Marine Corps. Yes, I am a former Marine. Semper Fi to all you jarheads out there. And while I was in the Marine Corps, I actually had the opportunity to watch some really cool videos of guys like Jerry Barnhart and Rob Latham shoot. And I'm like, I want to be able to shoot like them. So in typical Mike Seeklander fashion, I ordered every single book and video you could possibly imagine on the sport. And while I was deployed overseas, watched those videos, learned a lot from them, actually ordered holsters and magazines and mag pouches and a custom gun. And lo and behold, when I got back to the States, started competing and realized really quickly that it wasn't about the gun and gear. It was about having some experience and some shooting ability. And a good friend of mine, Rich Brown, and I actually started to hit every gun show. We had gun shows about once a month in Knoxville at that point in time. And we would buy a little ammo can full of ammo. And then for the rest of the month, once or twice a week, we would go shoot our ammo, practice. And then the next gun show would roll around. We'd buy another gun can full of ammo and go shoot again. So I'm an avid competitive shooter. I've been competing actively since about 1993. Wow, I dated myself there. And I got really serious in 97 and kind of set some goals to try to win a national championship. I've got numerous state area titles, won the World Speed Shooting Championship Production Division at the Still Challenge a few years ago. Got the IDPA Bug Gun National Championship the last 2 years, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, not to point out, hey, I've won this or that's really not that important to me, but my exposure to the top shooters in the area of competitive shooting, I'm close personal friends with most of them, which gives me the access to them and allows me to learn from them, because that's really Mike Seeklander in a nutshell. That's what I do. I like to figure out things. I like to break them down. I like to systematically look at a skill set and say, hey, how can I do that myself? and how can I teach someone how to do that particular skill set? So access to those top shooters has been an incredible learning experience for me. Before that, I said I was in the Marine Corps, joined the Marine Corps in 1990, spent about 4 years in premium active duty as an intel guy. I was an intel specialist, so I was in the intelligence field. Back in the day, of course, if you remember 1990, when I joined the Marine Corps in August of 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And shortly after that, I went to my MOS schools and deployed overseas and was part of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, where I got some certainly very unique experiences over there. Spent 4 years in the Marine Corps with 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines, and the 2nd Marine Regiment, and then got out and joined the reserves in Knoxville, Tennessee with a combat engineer unit. And then along the way, had some opportunities to do some counter-drug missions with what we called active duty special work in Los Angeles, California. I know it sounds like I probably can't hold down a job. That's enough about me. I think you've got my bio and my background down. I hope to see you in class someday. Another project I want you to know and learn about, which is obviously a big part of this podcast, is the American Warrior Society. What is the American Warrior Society? Well, to be honest with you, every great company or invention is born from a need, meaning there's a lack of something out there. And over my years of instructing, I found that one of the things that I kept running into with my students was their lack of quality information about guns, gear, technique. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a perfect example. I was in South Carolina recently in the last 2 years teaching a class, and I had 2 students in the class, a married couple, great people. The female in this married couple actually had a handgun in class that she was trying to manipulate and fighting this handgun. And the particular handgun was a small model, a SIG, actually, that has a thumb safety on it. Long story short, when I started talking to her and asking her why she was having so much trouble with this particular gun, which, by the way, is an excellent gun, she said, well, I can't manipulate the safety. And I said, why can't you manipulate the safety? She said, well, I've got really bad arthritis in my hands. I can't really move my thumbs very well. And I said, well, why did you select this model of gun? Because the guy at the gun store told me to. And I said, well, didn't he let you handle the gun or let you handle and maybe operate the controls on the gun? No, he recommended it, so I got it. And what I found was this reoccurs every single class. Hey, Mike, what gun should I get? Hey, Mike, what holster should I use? Hey, Mike, what knife do you carry? Hey, this, hey, that. And oftentimes what I found was people showed up to these classes that have been grossly misinformed about a technique or a product or a thought process or a method. From a lifelong exposure to those problems, the American Warrior Society was born. And here's the idea. The idea was to create an information source that would allow these people to educate themselves at their own pace with high quality and objective information. Well, high quality. Well, how do you know this is going to be high quality? Well, number one, because I have my alumni trust from them. So if they trust me to bring this information to them, the high quality part is up to me. I'm going to make sure that the information you're going to get on the American Warrior Society is high quality. Objective, what does that mean? Objectively looking at something means that it can't just be the Mike Seeklander way. It has to be objectively tested by other people, used in the real world, thought of as a technique or a piece of gear or a thought process that actually works and not just, for example, my personal favorite. So I'm going to stay away from that. Number two, the products, the techniques, the thought processes within this American Warrior Society entity can't be influenced by advertisements. And if you look at information models, let's take the magazine model. You buy any magazine off the bookshelf, and there, whether it's an electronic magazine that you read on a website or one that you read in print form, you're going to find one thing in those magazines, and that's advertisements. Every single magazine model out there, whether it's electronic or in print, is designed around the advertising model. Now, I'm not saying these magazines are bad or that they don't have great information. I write, for example, for the Recoil magazine right now. I have written for the Personal Defense Network in the past, and they're both really good entities. They're ran by good people, got a lot of respect for them, but they're driven by content that brings viewers or subscribers in so they can see advertisers. And one of the things about the American Warrior Society that I didn't want is I didn't want you all to land on this website page and then be distracted by these advertisements, or to look at the information about gear or technique or whatever we provide and say, hey, they're recommending the Glock 26 or Sig Sauer 230, whatever model handgun product ammunition, because Glock sends them a check for $25,000 a year. It's not going to work like that, folks. So the American Warrior Society is an advertisement-free site for those two reasons. Number one, I wanted to have the ability to be objectively truthful about everything sponsor-free. Number two, I didn't want you, the end user, to be distracted by advertisements. And if you go to any website nowadays, I mean, that's the problem. The problem is we literally have information overload. I mean, it's the point where, it happens to me. I get in front of my computer in my home office in the morning, and the next thing I know, instead of focusing on the task that I meant to focus on, it's like I got ADD. I got distracted by some sort of cool ad or a gun banner or something on Facebook, and I don't want that to happen with this information portal that we're going to provide. Why? Because the American Warrior Society is all about keeping you safe. I'd like to read the mission statement to you so you know just a little bit more about where we're coming from. Here it is. The American Warrior Society prepares men and women from any walk of life to survive violent encounters. We do this by providing the finest defensive information available without the bias of advertisers. While our staff and members come from all walks of life, they comport themselves to the highest moral and ethical standards. They are the reason for our demanding training, member selection, and product evaluation process. There it is, the mission statement. That's what we're all about. And this whole thing is about providing information so you can be safer, so your family can be safer. Who's an American warrior? You're an American warrior. I guarantee if you're listening to this podcast, whether you're the 32-year-old gun guy that I'll meet at the range every Saturday, or you're the 18-year-old female college student that just went to your first year of college, you are an American warrior. How do I know that? Because I guarantee you believe in the right to self-defense. Now, here's the deal. Some of you may not choose to carry a gun everywhere you go. That's okay. There are other tools for your toolbox. What I want to provide is an answer. The answer you select, the answer you choose, is up to you. And that's the concept behind the American Warrior Society, AWS. When's it going to be around? When are we going to launch this thing? Folks, our goal is to launch it sometime between March and April of 2015. But if you join us on AmericanWarriorSociety.com, find us on Facebook, just search for American Warrior Society. You can get on the Facebook page where we're going to post weekly updates on the progress. I'd love to see you in the site. Last but not least, before I close this out, I want to give you a free source of information and your one action to-do list for today. I've been writing on my own blog. It's blog.shooting-performance.com, and the dash is a hyphen. Don't ask me why I put the hyphen in my website name. It's something I selected long ago, and guess what? It's there, so that's the one you got to follow. And on my blog, I write about things that are, I would hope, inspirational and defensive-oriented as well as performance-oriented. So if you're a competitive shooter, if you're a defensive shooter, if you're someone that wants to read an article about fitness and motivation and some of the reasons behind training or goal setting, it's on my blog. I'm very diverse on what I write about. I will tell you that it's the subjects that I know the best, so I don't try to write about something that I don't know. I'd rather leave that to someone else that's an expert. I try to do the things that I'm good at, and I hope you enjoy reading it. So please join me on my blog. It's free. The articles are free, and there's a lot of great information. I've got about 100 articles up right now, and I'd love to have you read it. Once again, that's blog.shooting-performance.com. So let's close this out by me thanking my sponsors. Once again, I can't have this show without the sponsors. So thank you very much, Armscore USA and Corey Lack Pictures. Thank you to those show sponsors. Please utilize them or check them out if you can. Your action list. I want you to do two things for me. I want you to get on the AmericanWarriorSociety.com website. And if you're interested in knowing more about that in the release, you can join our mailer. We don't sell it. We don't spam it. In my newsletters, I put them out about once a month, so I get it. I'm not one of those marketers that's going to send you 3 newsletters a week. Not going to happen. Number 2, check out our Facebook page. My Facebook page, search for shooting-performance.com, or you can search for the American Warrior Society Facebook page. We're both on there. We'd love to have you like both of those. My personal page, if you send me a friend request, I'd love to be your friend, but guess what? I'm at their 5,000 limit. I don't know why they do that, but I can't accept friend requests because I'm at that limit. Send me a friend request and I don't accept. Forgive me, I can't. Last but not least, action point, I'd like you to get on my blog. Check out some of those free articles. The most recent one I wrote is on fitness and are you fighting fit? So if you carry a gun every single day, consider getting fitter because guess what? You're more likely to die from a heart attack or cardiovascular disease or something that relates to fitness than a gunfight tomorrow unless you're in Afghanistan. So get fit. Read that latest article as well as the other ones I've posted. Please join me on that blog. Thank you again for listening. Show number 1. We're going to close it, wrap this one up. I hope to see you on the next one. Until then, train hard.
Next time on the American Warrior Podcast.
12 people died. A crazed gunman with numerous weapons and a lot of ammunition walked into a movie theater of innocent people and started shooting them. No one shot back.